Hello and welcome to another session of Excel Programming for Clinicians with me, Dolotson Callon. In this session, we will record and edit a macro. We will cover how to add a button to the screen, how to record a macro, how to assign that macro to the button we added. We will then do some very basic edits of the macro, and I will show you in the code window how to step through the code that the macro generated. As we're doing that, we will also look at some of the values in the code using the immediate window. Now, before we actually record our macro, let's take a look at what it is exactly we want this macro to do. Now, imagine you are in charge of creating the rota, or you regularly create the clinic schedule. One of the things you might want to do is create a planner, maybe every week, maybe every month. So you might want to record a macro and assign it to a button so that every time you click the button, a new version of the rota or schedule gets created. Let's take a look at how we record a macro such as this. Okay, to start with, let's add a button. To add a button, go to the developer menu, select Insert, click on Button Control, and draw out the button on your screen. Now, Excel offers to assign this to a macro. We haven't recorded our macro yet, so for now, I'll say Cancel. I'll select inside my button, and I will change the text. Next, let's record a macro. From the developer menu, select Record Macro. Give the macro a name, and make sure it's stored in this workbook, and click OK. Every step we now take will be recorded and used to create a macro. Okay, so now Excel has created our macro. Our next step is to assign that macro to the button. Right-click on the button and select Assign Macro. Select the macro from the list and click on OK. Our macro is now assigned to our Create Schedule button. Let's test it. Click the button and a new schedule is added. Try that one more time. Click the button and a new schedule is added. Next, let's take a look at the code that Excel has generated. From the developer menu, click on Visual Basic. This opens up the code window. I'll dock mine to the right so you can see both of my screens. Okay, now so you'll notice that Excel has added a module section to the Project Explorer. If we expand that, it's added module 1. Double click on that and we can see in our code window the code that Excel has generated. Let's take a look at it. First of all, notice that it's added option explicit at the top, and you will remember that option explicit is added to indicate to Excel that we want to have all of our variables declared before we can use them. Our program itself starts with a sub and then the name of the sub, open and close bracket. And if I scroll down, it finishes off with an end sub. So all of our program is contained within a sub procedure. You will also notice this item of text here at the top in green. Excel uses the apostrophe to indicate comments. So anything that starts with an apostrophe is highlighted in green and is not actually run when the program is executed. It's just a comment to help us understand our program. Now, sometimes you might hear people say they want to comment out some code. This is a handy trick that allows you to stop a particular line of code from being executed without actually having to delete it. So if I scroll down, for instance, I can comment out this line of text, and I can still see it in my code, but it won't be executed when my code runs. Now let's take a look at the actual code. Excel, like many programming languages, uses what we call a dot notation. So it uses a full stop. So it has an object, in this case the sheets object, then it has a full stop or dot, and then it has some action you want to perform on that object. Here's another example. In this case, a range of cells, followed by a dot, followed by an action you want to perform. These actions in Excel programming language, we call them methods. So what we are doing is executing the select method on the range object. Another thing you can have after the dot is a property. In this case, the property is the formula R1C1, and that is set equal to an item of text. When we come to the VBA objects lesson, we will learn more about methods and properties. The other thing we can do is run our code using the debug menu that we added earlier on. So if I click on the green Run button, you will notice that it's run our code and added a new schedule. So without using Excel, we can run all of our code using the debug tools that we have up here. The other thing we can do is click anywhere against a line of code in the left-hand margin, and it puts what we call a breakpoint. So now when I run my code, it runs until it hits that breakpoint and then it stops. Then I can step through my code line by line and actually see it being executed in Excel. Now this is a very handy way of stepping through your code and seeing what it does and making sure it works exactly as you intended. Another way to run the code is to hit F8 on your keyboard. If I hit F8, it runs it one line at a time. Every time I hit F8, it runs the code one line at a time. Now I can stop at any time by hitting the reset button. Let's run our code again. And this time, we will have a look at what the immediate window does for us. As I step through my code, I can see it's got to the line where it's setting the active cell. If I go into my immediate window and I put question mark, and I type in active cell dot value and hit return, I can get the value that's actually currently in my active cell object. I can also see that value by hovering over the active cell. So as we mentioned earlier, the immediate window is a really handy tool for seeing what's going on in our code. Great. So in this lesson, we've had a look at how to add a button to a screen, how to record a macro, assign that macro to a button. We've also seen how to step through our code and examine our code as it runs. I hope you found that useful and interesting, and I will see you in the next lesson.